My grandfather was dying, and he'd finally decided to tell me about D-Day. After 79 years of silence, after a lifetime of refusing to discuss June 6, 1944, he was ready to speak. But I wasn't sure the world was ready to hear what he had to say. "Thomas," he said, his voice thin and reedy. The pneumonia had stolen most of his breath over the past week, but his eyes, those steel-gray eyes that had seen the beaches of Normandy, still held clarity. "I need to tell you something. Before I die. You need to know what really happened on D-Day." I squeezed his hand gently. At 98 years old, my grandfather looked like a strong wind could scatter him. But there was still strength in his grip, still fire in those eyes. "Grandpa, you should rest," the nurses said. "The nurses can wait. I've been resting for 79 years. Resting from the truth. Hiding from what I did." He coughed, a wet, rattling sound. "I don't have much time left. Days, maybe hours. And I can't die with this secret. Can't meet my brothers on the other side carrying this lie." The nursing home room was quiet except for the beeping of monitors and the whisper of oxygen flowing through his nasal cannula. Outside the window, the sun was setting, painting the autumn sky in shades of orange and red that seemed too beautiful for the moment. "I want to hear it," I said. "Whatever you need to tell me, I'm listening." My grandfather reached for the photograph spread across his bed, old black and white images of young men in paratrooper uniforms, members of the 101st Airborne Division, his unit, his brothers. "This is easy company," he said, pointing to the photo. 32 men when we loaded into those planes on June 5th. By June 7th, only 19 were still alive. The others died on the jump, in the hedgerows, in the fighting around St. Mary-Glise. I'd seen these photos before, heard the basic story. My grandfather had been a paratrooper, jumped into Normandy hours before the beach landings, fought for days behind enemy lines. A hero, a member of the greatest generation. What I'd never heard was what happened during those days, what he'd done, what had haunted him for 79 years. "We jumped at 1:30 hours on June 6th, he began, his eyes going distant. "Our objective was to secure the causeways behind Utah Beach, prevent German reinforcements from reaching the coast." Simple mission on paper, but nothing about D-Day was simple. He paused, struggling to breathe. I helped him take a sip of water. The jump was chaos. Anti-aircraft fire, planes breaking formation, paratroopers scattered across miles of French countryside. I landed in a swamp, nearly drowned in 4 feet of water, weighted down by equipment. Took me 30 minutes to find solid ground. When I finally got my bearings, I was alone. No unit, no squad, no idea where I was except somewhere in Normandy. I could hear fighting in the distance, machine gun fire, explosions. I knew I needed to link up with other paratroopers, complete the mission. My grandfather's hand tightened on mine. That's when I found them. 3 other men from Easy Company, Private James Mitchell, Corporal David Santos, and Private First Class William Chen. We'd all landed in the wrong area, miles from our drop zone. But we were alive, we were armed, and we had a mission. Santos took charge. He was the highest ranking among us. Said we needed to move toward the objective, try to link up with the main force. So we moved out, 4 scared kids trying to navigate enemy territory in the dark. The way he said scared kids made me realize just how young they'd been. My grandfather was 19 on D-Day, just a teenager, dropped into hell with a rifle and a prayer. We moved through the hedgerows for hours, heard German patrols but managed to avoid contact. Just after dawn, we found a farmhouse. Looked abandoned. Santos said we should clear it, make sure it was secure, maybe use it as a temporary base while we figured out our next move. But something in my grandfather's voice told me this farmhouse was where everything went wrong. We approached carefully. Standard clearing procedure. Santos and I took the front. Mitchell and Chen covered the rear. The door was unlocked. We went in expecting to find it empty, maybe occupied by French civilians hiding from the fighting. He closed his eyes and tears began rolling down his weathered cheeks. There were German soldiers inside, 5 of them, sleeping. They'd been on patrol all night, must have stopped to rest. We could have taken them prisoner, should have taken them prisoner. We had the element of surprise. We had superior position. Geneva Convention required it. What did you do? Santos made a decision. He said prisoners would slow us down, put us at risk, said we were behind enemy lines with no support, couldn't afford to guard POWs. And he said the Germans probably wouldn't have given us the same courtesy if the situation was reversed. My grandfather opened his eyes and looked at me, so we killed them. Shot them while they slept. 5 unarmed enemy soldiers executed in their beds. Mitchell went first, then Chen, then me. Santos finished the last one. 30 seconds and they were all dead. The horror of what he was describing settled over me like a weight. This wasn't combat. This wasn't self-defense. This was execution. "Grandpa, you were at war. In enemy territory. Maybe Santos was right that you couldn't. Don't." His voice was sharp despite its weakness. Don't make excuses for what we did. I've spent 79 years making excuses, telling myself it was justified, that it was war, that the enemy would have done worse to us. But I was there. I saw their faces, and I know what we did was murder. He struggled to sit up higher, and I adjusted his pillows. That's not even the worst part. After we killed them, we searched their bodies for intelligence, found letters from home, photographs of families, found out one of them had just become a father. His wife had sent him a picture of his newborn daughter. Another was 19 years old, same age as me. Just a scared kid who'd probably been conscripted, fighting for a regime he may not have even believed in, and we'd killed them in their sleep. No chance to surrender, no chance to fight back, just executed them because it was convenient. My grandfather pulled out another photograph from the collection on his bed. This one showed 4 young paratroopers. I recognized a much younger version of my grandfather among them. This was taken by a war correspondent 2 days after D-Day. Santos, Mitchell, Chen and me. We'd successfully linked up with our unit, participated in several engagements, completed our mission. We were heroes. Nobody knew what we'd done in that farmhouse. Nobody except the 4 of us. What happened to the others? Santos was killed 3 weeks later in Operation Market Garden. Mitchell made it through the war but killed himself in Chen died in Korea in 1950. Walked into enemy fire without taking cover. His squad said it looked almost deliberate. And you lived. Came home. Built a life. Raised a family. But you never told anyone about the farmhouse. How could I? How do you tell your wife, your children, your grandchildren that you're a war criminal? That beneath all the medals and honors and patriotic stories, you murdered 5 sleeping men who'd never had a chance to fight back? He was sobbing now, his frail body shaking with the force of confession. I've carried this for 79 years, seen those faces in my dreams, wondered about the daughter who never met her father, wondered about the families who got letters saying their sons died honorably in combat when really they were executed in their sleep by American soldiers. Did you ever try to find out who they were? Contact their families? I tried. After the war, I used my German language skills to research. Found out 2 of their names from the dog tags we should have collected but didn't. One was Klaus Weber from Hamburg. Another was Friedrich Müller from Bavaria. I found records showing Weber's daughter, the one in the photograph, grew up without her father, never knowing how he really died. What about the official records? Is there any documentation of what happened? None. We never reported it. Santos said we'd found the farmhouse empty, continued our mission. The 5 dead Germans were just counted as casualties of the campaign. Nobody investigated. Nobody questioned. We were heroes, and heroes don't murder sleeping enemies. My grandfather paused, struggling for breath. But here's what made it unbearable. In the months and years after the war, the world learned about Nazi atrocities, the Holocaust, the war crimes, the executions and mass murders, and everyone said we were different, that we were better, that we fought with honor while the enemy fought with brutality. And I stood there accepting that narrative, knowing I'd done exactly what we condemned the Nazis for doing. Killed unarmed prisoners, executed helpless people. The only difference was scale. They did it to millions, we did it to 5. But the principle was the same. I didn't know what to say. My grandfather, the man who'd taught me to fish, who'd told me stories of courage and honor, who'd been my hero, was confessing to war crimes. Why are you telling me this now? After 79 years? Because I'm dying, and I can't take this secret to my grave. Someone needs to know the truth. Not the sanitized version, not the hero story, but the truth about what war makes people do. About how quickly honor evaporates when you're scared and far from home and making split-second decisions that will haunt you forever. He pulled out an envelope from beneath his pillow. This is everything I know about the 5 Germans we killed. Names, hometowns, what little information I could gather over the years. There's also a full written confession. Every detail of what happened in that farmhouse. What do you want me to do with this? I want you to decide. Decide whether the truth matters more than my reputation. Whether those 5 German soldiers and their families deserve to know how they really died. Whether my crime should be exposed or whether it should die with me. That's not fair. You can't put this decision on me. I know it's not fair, but I've been a coward for 79 years, unable to make this decision myself. Now I'm out of time, and you're the one I trust to make the right choice, whatever that is. What about the army? What about potential prosecution? My grandfather laughed weakly. I'm 98 years old and dying. They're not going to prosecute me. But my reputation, our family's pride in my service, the way people see me as a D-Day hero, all of that would be destroyed. And you'd have to live with being the one who exposed your grandfather as a war criminal. Over the next hours, my grandfather told me everything he could remember. The exact location of the farmhouse, though it probably doesn't exist anymore. The description of each German soldier, the order in which they were killed. Every detail burned into his memory for 79 years. There's something else you need to know, he said as his strength was clearly fading. Something that makes this even more complicated. What? After we killed those 5 Germans, we continued our mission, linked up with our unit. And over the next weeks, I killed more enemy soldiers in actual combat, did things that were legitimate acts of war, saved American lives, helped liberate France. So am I a hero or a criminal? Did the good I did outweigh the evil? Can you murder 5 men and still be considered a good person if you also saved 20 men? I've never been able to answer that question. The nurses came in to check his vitals, expressed concern about his declining condition. They wanted to increase his morphine, make him more comfortable. He refused until he finished his story. The men I killed in legitimate combat, those deaths don't haunt me. That was war. That was self-defense. That was my job as a soldier. But those 5 in the farmhouse, those haunt me every single day, because I know the difference between war and murder. And what we did was murder. Grandpa, you were 19 years old. You'd been dropped into enemy territory. You were following your superior's orders. Following orders isn't an excuse. The Nazis at Nuremberg tried that defense. We rejected it then. I can't accept it for myself now. His voice was getting weaker. I made a choice that night. I pulled the trigger. I killed a sleeping man who'd never threatened me, who'd never had a chance to surrender. That's on me, not on Santos, not on the circumstances. On me. The sun had set completely now. The room was lit only by the soft glow of medical equipment and a small lamp. My grandfather's breathing was becoming more labored. "Promise me something," he said, gripping my hand with the last of his strength. "Promise me you'll make a decision about this. Don't hide the information and avoid dealing with it like I did. Choose to expose it or choose to bury it, but make a conscious choice. Don't let cowardice make the choice for you." "I promise, Grandpa. But I need to ask, do you regret what you did?" "Every single day of my life. But regret doesn't undo it, doesn't bring those 5 men back, doesn't give that daughter her father back. Regret is just the price I've paid for murder, and it's not enough. Justice would have been facing consequences. I never did. I got to live a long, mostly happy life while 5 men died without honor in their sleep. Do you think you should have been punished? Yes. Court-martialed at minimum, probably imprisoned. But Santos was in charge. Santos made the call, and Santos died a hero, never having to answer for what he ordered us to do. So I carried the guilt for all 4 of us. Carried it alone for 79 years. His eyes were starting to close. The morphine was finally taking effect. Or maybe just exhaustion from the confession. "The envelope," he whispered. "Don't decide tonight. Think about it. Consider all the angles. But decide. Promise me you'll decide." "I promise." "Good boy. You're a good boy, Thomas. Better than I ever was. Make the choice I was too cowardly to make." Those were his last coherent words. He drifted into unconsciousness over the next hour, never waking again. He died at 3:47 a.m., with me holding his hand, the envelope of evidence sitting on the nightstand. The funeral was everything you'd expect for a D-Day veteran. Military honors, honor guard, 21-gun salute, a flag folded with crisp precision and presented to my grandmother. Speeches about the greatest generation, about sacrifice, about heroism. I stood there holding the envelope in my jacket pocket, knowing the truth about my grandfather's service, wondering if I should speak up, wondering if these people deserved to know that the hero they were honoring was also a war criminal. I didn't speak up. Not then. I needed time to think, to process, to decide. Over the following weeks, I researched everything my grandfather had told me, used the information in the envelope to verify what I could, found records of the 101st Airborne's movements on D-Day, located the approximate area where that farmhouse would have been, found German casualty records that confirmed 5 soldiers went missing in that area around June 6, 19. Everything checked out. My grandfather's confession was credible. I also researched the families, found descendants of Klaus Weber and Friedrich Müller. Weber's daughter, the baby in the photograph, was still alive, 80 years old now, living in Hamburg. She'd spent her entire life believing her father died honorably in combat, defending France against Allied invasion. How do you tell an 80-year-old woman that her father was actually murdered in his sleep by American soldiers? That his death wasn't the honorable sacrifice she'd been told, but an execution that violated every rule of warfare? I consulted with military historians, legal experts, ethicists. The responses were mixed. Some said war crimes should always be exposed, regardless of how much time has passed. Others said exposing an event from 79 years ago serves no purpose except to cause pain to everyone involved. The legal experts said prosecution was impossible. My grandfather was dead. Santos was dead. The statute of limitations, if it even applied to war crimes, had long passed. Exposing the truth wouldn't lead to justice, just to scandal. The ethicists were split. Some argued that truth matters more than protecting reputations. Others contended that mercy toward the aged and dead outweighs the need for historical accuracy about a single incident among millions during World War II. I thought about what my grandfather had asked. Not whether I should expose it, but whether I should make a conscious choice rather than letting cowardice decide for me. After 3 months of deliberation, I made my decision. I compiled everything into a detailed document. My grandfather's confession, the evidence he'd gathered, my own research verifying the facts. I sealed it with instructions that it should be opened in 2044, 100 years after D-Day, when everyone directly involved would certainly be dead, when the emotional wounds would be historical rather than personal. I sent copies to the National Archives, to the 101st Airborne Division Museum, to several military historians. With each copy, I included a letter explaining that this was a delayed confession from a D-Day veteran who wanted the truth preserved, but didn't want to cause immediate pain to families still grieving. Then I did something my grandfather never did. I contacted Weber's daughter. Through a translator, I explained that I had information about her father's death in World War II. Information that complicated the simple narrative she'd been told, but information she deserved to have access to. She agreed to meet me in Hamburg. I flew to Germany, carrying my grandfather's confession. We met in a cafe near the Elbe River. She was exactly 80 years old, sharp-minded despite her age, curious about what this American grandson of a D-Day veteran wanted to tell her about her father. My grandfather served with the 101st Airborne, I began. He jumped into Normandy on June 6, 1944. Her eyes widened. He knew my father? Knew Klaus Weber? Yes. And before my grandfather died, he wanted to tell the truth about what happened to your father. It's not the story you've been told. It's harder, more painful, but it's the truth, and my grandfather believed you deserved to know it. I told her everything, about the farmhouse, about the sleeping German soldiers, about Santos's decision and the execution that followed, about my grandfather's 79 years of guilt. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she sat in silence for several minutes, tears running down her face. My whole life, she finally said, I believed my father died fighting for his country, fighting for a cause I now know was evil, but at least fighting. Now you tell me he was murdered in his sleep. I'm so sorry. My grandfather was sorry too. He carried the guilt of it until his death, but he wanted you to know the truth. Why? Her voice was sharp. Why tell me now, 80 years later, when there's nothing to be done about it? Why destroy the one comfort I've had that my father died with honor? Because my grandfather believed you deserved the truth, even if the truth was painful, even if it destroyed comfortable narratives. He said lies. Even kind lies were still lies. She looked at the photograph I'd brought, the one my grandfather had kept, showing the 5 German soldiers before their deaths. This is him? She pointed to one man in the photo. Yes, that's your father. She touched the image gently. I've only had one photograph of him my whole life, and now I have this one, showing him hours before he was killed by your grandfather. The words hurt, even though they were accurate. Frau Weber, I can't undo what my grandfather did. I can't bring your father back, but I can tell you that my grandfather was consumed with guilt about it, that he never forgave himself, that he spent 79 years carrying the weight of your father's death. Do you expect that to comfort me? No, I expect nothing. I'm just delivering the truth my grandfather wanted you to have. What you do with that truth is your decision. She studied the photo for a long time. Your grandfather was 19? Yes, and my father was 22. Both of them were boys. Neither of them wanted to be there, I imagine. Neither of them chose this war. They were just caught in it, making terrible decisions in terrible circumstances. That doesn't excuse what was done, no, but it explains it. War makes murderers of children. It forced your grandfather to kill my father, and then it forced your grandfather to live with that guilt for 79 years. Both of them were victims of that war, even though one pulled the trigger and one received the bullet. I hadn't expected forgiveness, hadn't even hoped for understanding, but here it was. I won't say I forgive your grandfather, she continued. I don't have that right. I'm not the one who was killed, but I understand why he did it, and I'm grateful he finally told the truth, even if it took until his deathbed to find the courage. He asked me to give you something. I pulled out another envelope. This is a letter he wrote to you. It's sealed. I haven't read it. He said it was between him and your father's daughter. She took the envelope with trembling hands, opened it carefully, read it while I sat in respectful silence. When she finished, she was crying harder. He apologizes. He tells me about the man my father was in his final moments, sleeping peacefully, dreaming perhaps of home and family. He says my father looked young and innocent, and that's what made the killing so terrible. He says he's sorry he can't give me back my father, but he hopes the truth is better than a lie. Is it? Is the truth better? She thought about that for a long time. I don't know. The lie was comfortable. The lie let me believe my father died with honor. But the truth is real. And maybe truth matters more than comfort, even 80 years later. We talked for hours. She told me about her life, growing up without a father, the struggles her mother faced, the stories she'd been told about Klaus Weber, the brave soldier. I told her about my grandfather, the quiet man who'd carried unspeakable guilt, who'd been both hero and criminal, who'd never been able to reconcile what he'd done with who he wanted to be. When we parted, she thanked me. "Your grandfather gave me something I never had, the truth about my father's death. It hurts. It destroys the comfortable story. But it's real, and I'm grateful for that. Even though the truth is terrible." I flew home carrying a strange sense of peace. I'd made a choice, not to hide the truth like my grandfather had, not to expose it immediately in ways that would only cause pain, but to preserve it for history while sharing it with the one person who most deserved to know. The sealed documents will be opened in 2044. Future historians will learn about the farmhouse and the 5 executed German soldiers. My grandfather's confession will become part of the historical record. But by then, everyone directly affected will be gone. The truth will exist, but it won't destroy the living. Frau Weber passed away 2 years after our meeting. In her obituary, her family mentioned that she'd recently learned new information about her father's death in World War II, information that brought both pain and closure. They thanked an unnamed American veteran who'd finally told the truth after 79 years. My grandfather was right. Truth matters. Even terrible truth. Even truth that destroys comfortable narratives. But he was also right that timing matters, that some truths can be told in ways that honor both the dead and the living. He'd carried his guilt for 79 years because he didn't know how to tell the truth without destroying everything. He'd been paralyzed by the choice between honesty and mercy. I'd found a middle path. Preserve the truth for history. Share it with those who most deserve to know. But don't weaponize it against the living. Don't use truth as a cudgel to destroy reputations when nothing can be gained except pain. My grandfather murdered 5 sleeping German soldiers on June 6, 1944. That's a fact. He carried the guilt of it for 79 years. That's a fact. He confessed on his deathbed because he couldn't die with the lie. That's a fact. But he was also a 19-year-old paratrooper making impossible decisions in impossible circumstances. He saved American lives in legitimate combat. He served with honor in many other engagements. He became a good man despite having done terrible things. All of these things are true simultaneously. He was a war criminal and a hero, a murderer and a good man, someone who committed evil acts, and someone who lived with crushing guilt about those acts for nearly 8 decades. And maybe that's the real lesson, that people are complex, that war creates situations where good people do terrible things, that guilt and responsibility and honor and shame can all exist in the same person, in the same life, without canceling each other out. My grandfather asked me to make a choice about his confession. I chose to honor both truth and mercy, to preserve his confession for history while protecting the living from immediate pain, to tell Frau Weber so she could know her father's real story, but not to publicly expose my grandfather's name in ways that would only cause scandal. I don't know if I made the right choice. Maybe the truth should have been exposed immediately, completely, regardless of consequences. Maybe I'm just another generation of coward, finding a compromise that lets me avoid hard decisions. But I think about my grandfather's face as he confessed. The relief mixed with terror. The desperate need to unburden himself mixed with fear of the consequences. The hope that someone would finally understand the impossible position he'd been in, balanced against the knowledge that understanding doesn't equal forgiveness. And I think about Frau Weber, holding that photograph of her father, learning the truth after 80 years, the pain in her eyes, but also the gratitude, the sense that even terrible truth is better than comfortable lies. That's what I take from my grandfather's confession. That truth matters, but so does mercy. That some secrets should be told, but the telling can be done with care for the living. That even terrible acts can be acknowledged without destroying every good thing a person did. My grandfather died having confessed his crime. Frau Weber died knowing how her father really died. The truth exists, preserved for future historians who can judge it with the objectivity of time and distance. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's all we can hope for when dealing with terrible truths about terrible times. Not perfect justice, not complete forgiveness, but honesty, preserved with care, truth told with mercy. My grandfather was a war criminal. He was also my hero. Both things are true, and learning to hold both truths simultaneously is what it means to understand the real cost of war. Not just the soldiers who died, but the soldiers who lived, carrying unbearable burdens for the rest of their lives. The soldiers who came home but never really left the battlefield. The soldiers who did things they could never forgive themselves for, and spent decades wondering if they deserved to be called heroes. That was my grandfather, war criminal and D-Day hero, murderer and good man. And finally, after 79 years, honest about all of it,